member for Davenport.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. It's an absolute honour for me to stand here in this venerable House on behalf of my constituents, the residents of Davenport, to speak on behalf of this very important bill, an act relating to economic recovery in response to COVID-19. This key piece of legislation is vital to the government's economic response to the COVID-19 pandemic and will help ensure that Canadians continue to have the supports that they need to weather the COVID-19 storm.
Since the beginning of the pandemic, our government has taken quick action to respond to the challenges Canadians and Canadian companies are facing. And as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the current increase in the number of COVID-19 cases and the beginning of the second wave has shown us that we continue to deal with this pandemic.
We must not let our guard down when Canadians need us the most. By supporting Canadians who cannot work due to COVID-19, we're making it possible for our country to continue to practice physical distancing and to do the right thing to protect Canadians' health and safety. That is why, Mr. Speaker, we are asking all members of Parliament to also do the right thing, to pass this bill so that the government can continue to finance emergency measures to support Canadians and businesses. As well, in passing this bill, we'll also ensure 3 key measures are introduced that will help many Canadians who are still having a hard time finding a job, making ends meet, who are taking care of loved ones who are affected by COVID, or who might potentially be sick and need some coverage in that area. Monsieur le Président, nous pouvons...
Mr. Speaker, we can all agree that this pandemic is the worst public health crisis that Canada has ever experienced. Job losses are perhaps the most obvious consequence around the world. Canadians are suffering, as are others in other countries. With job losses that Canadians have experienced, it quickly became apparent that many of them would need assistance until they can find another job. But the existing income support systems were not able to respond to this unprecedented situation. That is why the government quickly created the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, a temporary program to help millions of Canadians get through this difficult time. Since the implementation of the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, since the beginning of the pandemic, and when we asked Canadians to stay home, more than 9 million Canadians have received this to help them pay their bills and to meet the needs of their families. The restart is now well underway. Beneficiaries receiving CERB will now have to move to the EI program. For those who would not normally be entitled to EI, the government, with this legislation, would temporarily create the Canadian Economic Restart Program. This bill would also implement 2 new types of benefits relating to the restart in order to help Canadians who are unable to work for reasons related to COVID-19. The Canadian Sickness Benefit and the Canadian Economic Restart Benefit. These new benefits are being proposed in the government's plan, the goal of which is to support Canadians while we work to rebuild a stronger and more resilient economy.
We'll introduce 3 key measures that I think will be very helpful, and I know many residents in my riding of Davenport will find it very helpful. We'll be introducing the Canada Recovery Benefit, of up to $500 per week for up to 26 weeks to workers who are self-employed, who are not eligible typically for EI, and who still require income support. This benefit will support Canadians who have not returned to work due to COVID-19 or whose income has dropped by at least 50%. We're also introducing a Canada Recovery sickness benefit of $500 per week for up to 2 weeks for workers who are sick or must self-isolate for reasons related to COVID-19. And we're also introducing a Canada Recovery caregiving benefit of $500 per week for up to 26 weeks per household for eligible Canadians unable to work because they have to care for someone who is suffering from COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the immediate and impactful measures that the government has implemented to date. Passing this bill will enable our government to continue this important work. With this bill, our government is also seeking to extend the Public Health Events of National Concern Payments Act, which is set to expire on September 30th until the end of the year. This act was instrumental at the beginning of the pandemic in allowing the government to quickly put in place and finance many of the emergency measures through Canada's COVID-19 Economic Response Plan that have supported Canadians and businesses through these difficult times. Failing to extend this act could cause a disruption to these critical payments. This includes measures to support Canadian employers, big and small, who are the backbone of our economy, that have helped weather the storm. Des programmes comme l'aide d'urgence du Canada.
Programs like the one that has allowed us to help more than 121,000 small businesses, which represents more than 1.1 million staff. Thanks to more than $1.6 billion, they've been able to pay their rent. We are extending the public health events expenditures until the end of the year, and through this we will make sure that eligible candidates can still benefit from it.
One example of the many emergency measures that will enable the government to protect the health and safety of Canadians, particularly those who are most vulnerable, and the support that Canadians' businesses rely on. Funding for important measures in our fight against COVID-19, including the purchase of personal protective equipment to help keep our essential workers safe and to safely restart our economy, medical research to increase our knowledge of the virus and to inform our response, and the future purchase of vaccines and other treatments. Now is not the time, Mr. Speaker, for austerity. Now's not the time for us not to be doing everything we can to support Canadians, to support workers, to support our small, medium, and large businesses as we continue to grapple with the impacts of this pandemic. Notre gouvernement.
Our government is determined to undertake the necessary measures to protect Canadians and companies from the economic consequences caused by COVID-19. The first stage of this consists in ensuring that we have the necessary legislation implemented to avoid late payments to Canadians in extant programs, and that Canadians receive the help and support they need when they have need of it the most.
This bill, all parties can make sure that that happens as we work together to build a stronger, more resilient Canada for the health and safety of Canadians, for their income security and livelihoods, and for families and businesses that continue to need support through this difficult and unprecedented time. I urge all members of Parliament to join me in supporting this passage of this bill. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak on behalf of the residents of Davenport. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before